March 17, 1943, 400 miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller-Edzards peered through the attack periscope of U-150 as the gray silhouette of an American destroyer emerged from the fog bank ahead. His trained eye noted the vessel's configuration. Flush deck, 4 smokestacks, unmistakably one of the ancient 4-stacker destroyers the Americans were using for convoy escort. "Another American antique," Müller-Edzards muttered to his watch officer. "They give us their grandfather's ships and expect to protect convoys with museum pieces." The 32-year-old U-boat commander had reason for confidence. With 7 Allied merchant ships to his credit and 2 combat patrols completed, he understood the mathematics of underwater warfare. Traditional depth charge attacks required the escort ship to pass directly over the submarine's position, losing sonar contact at the critical moment. The U-boat commander would then order evasive maneuvers, a hard turn, a change in depth, and the depth charges would explode harmlessly hundreds of yards away. It was a deadly game, but one German U-boat captains had mastered through 3 years of Atlantic combat. British and American destroyers would race toward the submarine's last known position, drop their depth charge patterns, and hope for a lucky hit. Meanwhile, the U-boat would slip away in the confusion, ready to attack again. But as Müller-Edzards watched the destroyer through his periscope, something caught his attention. The vessel's forecastle, the forward deck, carried an unusual structure. Not the traditional depth charge racks he'd observed on dozens of escort vessels, but a strange framework resembling a massive mortar pit with 24 tubes angled forward. "What is that contraption on her bow?" Müller-Edzards asked his executive officer. Before anyone could answer, the destroyer's bow erupted. 24 projectiles arced through the air in a circular pattern, flying forward of the ship rather than being rolled off the stern. The weapons splashed into the water 200 yards ahead of the destroyer in a perfect circular pattern, roughly 150 feet in diameter. Müller-Edzards had 3 seconds to realize his understanding of anti-submarine warfare had just become obsolete. The explosions came simultaneously, 24 contact-fused projectiles detonating the instant they touched U-150's pressure hull. The submarine had no warning, no time to evade, no opportunity to use the tactics that had protected U-boats for years. The destroyer hadn't needed to pass over the submarine and lose contact. It had fired forward while still tracking U-150 on sonar, placing the weapons exactly where the submarine would be. U-150 imploded at 180 feet depth. All 48 crew members died instantly. The wreckage would not be discovered until 1988, when a survey vessel found the shattered hull on the ocean floor, the massive holes in the pressure hull testament to the devastating effectiveness of the new weapon. What Kapitänleutnant Müller-Edzards never knew was that he and his crew had just become victims of one of World War II's most revolutionary weapon systems, the Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. Within 24 months, this ungainly-looking device would transform the Battle of the Atlantic from a close-fought struggle into a systematic slaughter of U-boats. German submarine commanders who had mocked the American destroyers and their outdated equipment would learn that innovation, not tradition, determined survival. The Hedgehog's 24 projectiles, each weighing 65 pounds and carrying 35 pounds of high explosive, would sink more submarines per attack than any weapon in naval history. And the mathematics that had protected U-boats, the certainty that escorts would lose contact during attack runs, would become irrelevant. The weapon that would break the back of the U-boat offensive didn't look impressive. It didn't have the dramatic visual impact of massive depth charge explosions that sent columns of water 200 feet into the air. But it killed with surgical precision, and German submariners would come to fear it more than any other weapon in the Allied arsenal. The problem: blind attacks. By 1942, the Battle of the Atlantic was approaching crisis point. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than replacements could be built. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank 1,664 ships totaling over 7.8 million tons, an average of nearly 5 ships per day. The primary anti-submarine weapon was the depth charge, a drum containing 300 to 600 pounds of high explosive, set to detonate at a specific depth. Escort vessels would detect a submarine using sonar, called ASDIC by the British, race toward the contact, and roll depth charges off racks at the stern, or fire them from side-throwing K-gun projectors. But the tactic had a fatal flaw. As the escort ship approached the submarine's position, the sonar's effective range decreased dramatically. At 1,000 yards, sonar could paint a clear picture of the submarine's location. At 200 yards, the contact became fuzzy. At 50 yards, the distance at which depth charges were released, the submarine disappeared from sonar entirely. The attacking ship was effectively blind during the critical moments of the attack. U-boat commanders exploited this weakness ruthlessly. The standard evasion tactic was simple. When an escort began its attack run, the submarine would maintain course and speed until the escort lost sonar contact, then immediately execute a hard turn, 30 degrees or more, and change depth. By the time the depth charges exploded at the submarine's last known position, the U-boat had moved 200 to 300 yards away. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Warder, captain of the American destroyer USS Bory, described the frustration in a 1942 action report. Achieved solid sonar contact at 200 yards. Ran in at 20 knots. Lost contact at 100 yards as expected. Dropped 9 charge patterns set for 150 feet. Observed massive explosions. Regained contact after explosions subsided. Submarine bearing now 340 degrees, 400 yards from drop point. No apparent damage. The bastard had turned and we missed him completely. The mathematics were brutal. Analysis of depth charge attacks through 1942 showed that only 4% resulted in submarine kills. An escort ship needed an average of 25 attack runs, dropping 200 to 300 depth charges, to sink a single U-boat. Many submarines survived dozens of depth charge attacks without serious damage. Korvettenkapitän Reinhard Teddy Surin, one of Germany's top U-boat aces with 18 ships sunk, survived over 40 depth charge attacks during his career. He later wrote, "The British and Americans were predictable. They would run straight at us, lose contact, drop their charges where they thought we were, and we would be somewhere else. Sometimes the explosions were close enough to rattle equipment and shake confidence, but rarely close enough to cause real damage. We called it being hammered, uncomfortable, but survivable." British scientists at the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division understood the problem clearly. Ships were dropping weapons blindly at where submarines used to be, not where they currently were. What the Navy needed was a weapon that could be fired while the escort still held sonar contact, a weapon that would land where the submarine actually was, not where it had been 30 seconds earlier. The concept of forward-throwing anti-submarine weapons emerged in 1940 from the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, nicknamed the Weasers and Dodgers by the Royal Navy. This unconventional think tank, staffed by civilian scientists and maverick naval officers, was tasked with developing innovative solutions to tactical problems. Lieutenant Commander Charles Goodeve, a chemistry professor turned weapons designer, proposed a radical idea. Instead of rolling depth charges off the stern, fire projectiles forward from a mortar-like launcher. The escort ship could remain in sonar contact throughout the attack, adjusting aim until the last moment. The first attempt, called Fairley Mortar after its inventor, was promising but flawed. It fired a single 200-pound projectile 250 yards ahead of the ship. But the weapon's reload time was over 2 minutes, and a single projectile gave the submarine too much chance of being missed. The breakthrough came when the design team proposed firing multiple projectiles simultaneously in a pattern. If 24 projectiles landed in a circular pattern 150 feet in diameter, the submarine would have nowhere to evade. Even if only one projectile hit, it would be enough. The weapon that emerged was christened Hedgehog because the cluster of 24 launch tubes resembled a hedgehog's spines. Each tube held a single projectile, a finned bomb weighing 65 pounds with a contact fuse. Unlike depth charges that exploded at preset depths whether they hit anything or not, Hedgehog projectiles only detonated on contact with a solid object. This feature had profound implications. If the Hedgehog pattern exploded, you had hit the submarine. If you heard nothing, you had missed and could immediately attack again without waiting for the massive water disturbance from depth charge explosions to settle. The first operational Hedgehog installation went to sea aboard HMS Westcott in January 1942. The weapon's first kill came on December 9, 1942, when HMS Vanek sank U-587 in the North Atlantic with a single Hedgehog pattern. All 24 projectiles launched successfully, arcing 200 yards ahead of the destroyer. 2 projectiles struck U-587's pressure hull. Both exploded on contact, rupturing the submarine's hull at 150 feet depth. U-587 sank with all hands in less than 20 seconds. The United States Navy observed British Hedgehog trials with intense interest. By early 1943, American shipyards were producing escort vessels at rates that stunned the world. Destroyer escorts, frigates, and corvettes were rolling off production lines at a rate exceeding 1 ship per day. The Bureau of Ships authorized immediate Hedgehog production. American manufacturers began producing the weapon in massive quantities. By March 1943, Hedgehog systems were being installed on every new American escort vessel and retrofitted onto existing destroyers. The American version incorporated several improvements. The Mark X Hedgehog featured faster reloading. A trained crew could reload all 24 projectiles in under 4 minutes. The launcher could be trained, aimed, up to 45 degrees left or right, allowing the escort to maintain sonar contact without pointing directly at the submarine. Each Hedgehog projectile carried 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT. The contact fuse was devastatingly simple and reliable. A long metal rod protruded from the projectile's nose. When this rod struck anything solid, a submarine's hull, a submerged rock, even a whale, it crumpled, triggering the detonator. The projectile's design was brilliant in its lethality. Unlike depth charges that had to explode within 20 feet of a submarine's hull to cause damage, Hedgehog projectiles were designed to punch through the pressure hull before detonating. The shaped charge effect meant that even a single hit would rupture the hull catastrophically. Commander Louis Iceland, chief of the Anti-Submarine Warfare Operations Research Group, ran the numbers in May 1943. His analysis was startling. Hedgehog attacks achieve submarine kills in 25% of engagements where contact is maintained throughout the attack. This represents a 6-fold improvement over conventional depth charge attacks. Furthermore, attack time is reduced by 75%. An escort can fire, observe results, and fire again within minutes rather than waiting 20 minutes for water conditions to clear after depth charge attacks. Baptism of fire, USS England's rampage. The weapon's devastating effectiveness became clear in May 1944, when the destroyer escort, USS England, embarked on one of the most remarkable anti-submarine patrols in naval history. Operating in the Solomon Islands, USS England was hunting Japanese submarines attempting to establish a reconnaissance line ahead of the American invasion fleet. The destroyer escort's sonar operator, Seaman First Class William Garfield, was exceptionally skilled, maintaining contact even in difficult water conditions. On May 19, 1944, USS England detected I-16 at 2,100 yards. Commander Walton Pendleton, England's captain, ordered a Hedgehog attack. The destroyer escort approached at 12 knots, slow enough to maintain perfect sonar contact. At 300 yards, Pendleton ordered fire Hedgehog. 24 projectiles arced forward, splashing in a perfect circular pattern. 3 seconds later, a massive explosion shook the ship. The sonar operator reported the contact had vanished. USS England had sunk I-16 with its first Hedgehog attack. 3 days later, England detected RO-106 at 1,800 yards. Again, Pendleton closed slowly, maintaining continuous sonar contact. The Hedgehog fired. This time 5 explosions rang out, 5 direct hits. RO-106 imploded at 200 feet, killing all 66 crew members. On May 24th, England found RO-104. 1 Hedgehog pattern, 2 hits. Submarine destroyed. On May 26th, RO-116 tried to evade by diving to 400 feet, deeper than most submarines operated. England's sonar tracked the contact. The Hedgehog fired at maximum range, 250 yards. One projectile struck RO-116's hull. The submarine imploded from depth pressure combined with explosive damage. On May 31st, England detected RO-108. The Japanese submarine commander, aware that multiple submarines had been lost in this area, attempted aggressive evasive maneuvers, changing depth, speed, and course continuously. It didn't matter. England's sonar operator held contact. The Hedgehog fired. 3 hits. RO-108 disintegrated. In 12 days, USS England had sunk 6 submarines, more than any other escort vessel in the entire war. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, sent a message to England's crew. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. But beyond the remarkable achievement was the tactical lesson. Hedgehog made submarine killing efficient, reliable, almost routine. The weapon had transformed anti-submarine warfare from a game of chance into a science of precision. German realization: the rules have changed. By summer 1943, U-boat commanders returning from Atlantic patrols were reporting disturbing encounters with Allied escorts. The reports described a new weapon, projectiles that flew forward from the attacking ship, landed in patterns, and exploded only on contact. Fregattenkapitän Günther Kuhnke, commanding U-125, survived a Hedgehog attack in June 1943 and filed a detailed report. The enemy destroyer maintained sonar contact during its entire approach. At approximately 300 meters, I observed projectiles launch from the vessel's bow, not the stern. 20 or more projectiles landed in a circular pattern ahead of our position. I ordered emergency deep and full rudder. We went to 190 meters. 3 projectiles struck the hull but did not penetrate. I believe we were below their effective depth setting. The explosions caused severe damage to ballast tanks and diving planes. We aborted patrol and returned to base. Kuhnke had been lucky. The Hedgehog projectiles struck at such an angle that they bounced off rather than penetrating. But his report sent shockwaves through U-boat command. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of U-boat operations, ordered immediate tactical analysis. The assessment was grim. Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, a veteran commander with 23 ships sunk, wrote in the tactical evaluation: "The forward-throwing weapon eliminates our primary defensive advantage. We can no longer evade during the blind period when the escort passes over our position. The escort maintains sonar contact throughout the attack and places weapons precisely on our location. Traditional evasion tactics, turns and depth changes during the escort's attack run, are now ineffective." Dönitz ordered new defensive procedures. U-boats were instructed to dive immediately to maximum depth when detected, below 200 meters if possible, in hopes that the projectiles couldn't reach them. They were to make radical maneuvers the moment they detected an escort approaching: 90-degree turns, emergency full speed, anything to break sonar contact. But these countermeasures proved inadequate. The Hedgehog's advantage was fundamental. As long as the escort held sonar contact, and skilled operators could maintain contact through most evasive maneuvers, the submarine was in mortal danger. Oberleutnant Sir Peter Kremer, commanding U-333, survived 3 Hedgehog attacks in October 1943. His patrol log recorded the psychological impact. "The new weapon is terrifying. You hear the destroyer approaching on hydrophones. You hear the launch, a distinctive whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Then silence as the projectiles fly through the air. You count seconds, not knowing if the pattern will land on you or nearby. If you hear nothing, they missed. If you hear explosions, you're either dead or catastrophically damaged. There is no intermediate state. The weapon either misses entirely or kills you. The uncertainty is crushing crew morale." By 1944, Hedgehog-equipped escorts were sinking U-boats at unprecedented rates. The weapon's kill rate, percentage of attacks that resulted in submarine sinking, reached 24%, compared to 4% for conventional depth charges. The Royal Navy's HMS Lagan sank 4 U-boats with Hedgehog between January and June 1944. HMS Swale sank 3. The American destroyer escort USS Buckley sank U-66 with a single Hedgehog pattern in May 1944, then rammed and sank U-879 the same day using gunfire and boarding parties. But it was the Hedgehog attack that had forced U-879 to surface damaged. The cumulative effect was devastating. In 1943, U-boats sank 597 Allied ships totaling 3.2 million tons, less than half the 1942 total. In 1944, the total fell to 205 ships totaling 1.1 million tons. U-boat losses, meanwhile, skyrocketed. In 1943, 244 U-boats were destroyed. In 1944, another 242 were sunk. The Hedgehog accounted for a significant percentage of these kills. Records show that Hedgehog attacks sank at least 270 submarines between 1942 and 1945, 47 by British vessels, 223 by American escorts. This represented roughly 32% of all submarine kills during the war. Even more significantly, Hedgehog attacks had another effect. They forced U-boats to remain submerged and defensive. A U-boat that detected an escort with Hedgehog couldn't surface to attack. The submarine had to evade, breaking off its attack on the convoy. This defensive posture meant fewer merchant ships sunk even when U-boats weren't destroyed. The final assessment. After the war, German submarine commanders who survived gave interviews about their experiences. Their assessments of the Hedgehog were unanimous. It was the most feared anti-submarine weapon they faced. Kapitän Erich Tupp, third highest scoring U-boat ace with 35 ships sunk, stated in a 1946 interview, "The Hedgehog changed everything. Before its introduction, depth charge attacks were dangerous but survivable. We had procedures, tactics, training. The Hedgehog made those tactics obsolete. If an escort achieved solid sonar contact and had Hedgehog, your chances of survival were perhaps 30%. We feared it more than aircraft, more than escort carriers, more than anything except being caught on the surface." Forgotten Kapitän Reinhard Suren, who survived the war despite 40-plus depth charge attacks, was asked what weapon he feared most. Hedgehog, without question. Depth charges were like being inside a drum while someone hits it with hammers. Terrifying, disorienting, but often survivable. Hedgehog was like being shot. Clean, precise, usually fatal. If you heard those projectiles hit the hull, you were dead. You just didn't know it for the 2 seconds before they exploded. Admiral Dönitz, in his war memoir, acknowledged the weapon's impact. The introduction of forward-throwing mortars by the British and their rapid adoption by the Americans marked a turning point in the U-boat war. The weapon's effectiveness was not merely technical, though it was devastatingly effective, but psychological. U-boat crews, knowing that escorts carried Hedgehog, became more cautious, more defensive, less willing to press attacks. This erosion of aggressive spirit was as damaging as the submarines actually sunk. The statistics supported this assessment. From January 1944 onward, when Hedgehog deployment became widespread, the kill rate of Allied convoys, tonnage of merchants sunk per U-boat patrol, dropped by 63%. U-boat patrol lengths decreased by 40%, as submarines spent more time evading and less time attacking. Innovation over tradition. The Hedgehog represented a fundamental principle. Innovation defeats experience. German U-boat commanders had spent years perfecting tactics against conventional depth charges. They had developed procedures, training programs, and operational doctrines based on 3 years of combat experience. The Hedgehog made that experience worthless overnight. The weapon exploited a fundamental weakness in traditional anti-submarine warfare, the blind period during attack, and eliminated it. No amount of skill or experience could overcome the tactical advantage of continuous sonar contact during attack. The weapon's success drove further innovation. By 1944, the Squid system, a triple-barreled Hedgehog that fired 3 projectiles simultaneously, was entering service. The American Mousetrap launcher used rocket-propelled projectiles for even longer range. Post-war developments led to modern anti-submarine rocket systems that trace their lineage directly to the Hedgehog concept. At the United States Naval Academy Museum, a Hedgehog projector sits in the World War II gallery. The placard notes, This ungainly weapon system achieved a kill rate 6 times higher than conventional depth charges and sank over 270 submarines. German U-boat commanders, who had mocked Allied escorts as inadequate, learned that tactical innovation matters more than experience when the innovation changes the fundamental rules of combat. The lesson extended beyond naval warfare. The Hedgehog demonstrated that in military technology, the side that identifies and exploits the enemy's tactical weaknesses, even seemingly minor ones like a brief period of lost contact, can achieve decisive advantages. The Germans had built their U-boat tactics on the certainty that escorts would lose sonar contact during attacks. When that certainty vanished, so did German control of the Atlantic. By May 1945, the U-boat threat had been eliminated. Of the 1,154 U-boats commissioned during the war, 783 were destroyed, a loss rate of 68%. Over 30,000 German submariners died at sea. The Hedgehog, an odd-looking contraption that didn't produce dramatic explosions or inspire dramatic newsreel footage, had killed more efficiently than any other anti-submarine weapon in history. German U-boat captains had mocked American destroyers and their antiquated equipment. They stopped mocking when those 24 projectiles began arcing through the air with surgical precision, each one a potential death sentence. The thunder of massive depth charge explosions was replaced by the quiet splash of Hedgehog projectiles, and then either silence or the sound of imploding steel. For U-boat crews, that silence became the most terrifying sound of the war.